There's three things I'd like to say regarding the air tunnel. And they are, get a life.
The plan for John, obviously, he's done many talks, and a lot of us have attended them, so we thought the best way to go with this was kind of a question and answer session, so you can ask what you want to know, rather than, obviously, maybe not getting the questions you want answered. But we're going to start with one from me, a nice broad question to get us going. So John, how did it all begin?
Okay, back in 1983, Madame Tussauds owned Chessington Zoo. It was not doing so well, and I was asked to go along there, and my brief was literally, and these were the words they used, to sort out the funfair and the circus at Chessington. The corkscrew had just been put into Alton Towers, and John Broome, who was the principal tenant here, prior to putting in the corkscrew, Brian Collins had the funfair here. John Broome married one of the Bagshaw daughters. The Bagshaw family owned the towers, and John became the concessionaire that ran the miniature railway and the boating lake and the chairlift, or skyride as it is now today. He decided that he wanted to upgrade the amusement attractions here at Alton Towers, and did a deal with some German travelling showmen and leased a corkscrew ride and a few other things. There was a Weber dreamboat, you might remember. I think there was a rainbow, polyp, a few other rides which were leased from German travelling showmen. And he charged one price to come in the park, and you could ride the rides for free, and everyone got very excited about this. And it really did stir up the rest of the industry. Small amusement parks around the country really felt the pinch. Now, Chessington, as I say, was owned by Madame Tussauds, and it really wasn't doing very well, and I was asked to sort out the funfair and the circus. And I looked around and I wrote a report which basically said, I do not think the answer to Chessington's problems are to sort out the funfair and the circus. Thank you very much indeed. And they said, well, don't call us, we'll call you. And it was about a year later that I got a phone call from a guy, and he said, you won't know me, but I'm one of the new directors at Madame Tussauds. I've just started, and Chessington is now my problem. And I'd found this rather enigmatic letter in my predecessor's filing cabinet. And he said, from what I can read between the lines, when you say that you don't think the answer to Chessington's problems is sorting out the funfair and the circus, reading between the lines, I think you say you do know what the answer is. And I said, yes, I do. So he said, right, let's talk about it. And so I put together a scheme based on using fairly standard ride hardware, but very heavily theming it. Having ridden many years previously Big Thunder at Disney, I thought if we got a standard Mac Blaurensian ride and slung a big plaster mountain over it, we could produce relatively cost effectively our own version of Big Thunder Railroad. I thought we could take a flume ride, standard Mac flume, put plenty of decoration and theming around it, turn that into a themed ride, and so on. So I put forward this scheme, little thinking that they would turn around and say, okay, do it, which is what they did. In 1987, we opened the first phase of Chessington World of Adventures, and it was a huge success. It really did take us by surprise. And Pearson, who owned Madame Tussauds, said, right, we haven't got any scope here to expand because there was very, very severe planning restrictions there. We now want the brand leaders. We want something bigger and better than we can ever do at Chessington. So we then looked around, and we looked at lots of sites around the country, from Corby Steelworks through to Woburn Abbey. And wherever we found a site that we could get planning permission, a brownfield site such as Corby Steelworks, we knew that it was going to cost a fortune just to make the place fit for public gaze. Whereas all the beautiful sites that we thought would make fabulous theme parks, such as Woburn, we knew we'd never get planning consent, so we were in a bit of a mess. But then I heard through the grapevine that a lot of the resources here at Alton Towers, both financial and in terms of personnel, were being bled dry by John Broome getting involved with the Battersea Power Station project. The Battersea Power Station project, back in Margaret Thatcher's day, it was going to be the greatest thing to be developed in London. John Broome had nailed his colours to the mast, and at one point he went on national television saying that it was going to open on such and such a day at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and he then famously said, "And don't come at 2:05 or you'll miss it." And of course we all know that it never happened. But a lot of the management here were being drafted down to Battersea. A lot of financial resources were being poured into Battersea, and Alton Towers, as a consequence, was suffering. Investment here was suffering, visitor numbers were dropping off, and we thought this might be an opportunity for us to acquire the basis of a site that is well located, slap bang in the middle of England, with basic infrastructure there, and we can then take it on and really build it up. So Pearson, who owned Madame Tussauds, also owned Lazard's, the merchant bankers, who were able to do a very thorough due diligence exercise on Alton Towers and discovered that an awful lot of the assets of Alton Towers were not actually owned by Alton Towers. And as a consequence, if you bought Alton Towers, you didn't buy the corkscrew and you didn't buy a lot of other things. They were all leased or rented. And as a consequence, we were able to do a lot of preparatory financial work in advance of eventually Alton Towers being put on the market. So when Alton Towers was put on the market, Tussauds knew exactly what it was worth and what they were buying. Whereas all the other big players in the market, people like First Leisure and Granada, immediately jumped in with amazing offers, far, far bigger than our offer. We realised that, well, we were out of the game. But of course, one by one, as these other players started to seriously look at the assets they were buying, they realised that they weren't getting what they thought they were going to get, and that their offers were far too high. And one by one, they all pulled out, with the exception of us. So that's how we came to acquire Alton Towers. It all happened very quickly, and on the day that we actually acquired it, I was faced with the decision of having to sign a contract, well, not me actually signing a contract, but putting a contract in front of our chief executive, Michael Herbert, to sign for a big roller coaster that was being built by, or proposed to be built by a company called BHS, and that's not British Home Stores. Those of you that have heard of Werner Stengel, and he's quite a well-known name in our industry, he and a partner had started a small company called BHS that did the Leesburg barn at Leesburg, and were going to build a coaster virtually behind, well, more or less next to where 13 has been built, behind where the corkscrew was. It was a big ride, and it had as its main sort of feature a racing element where the trains, actually there were 2 circuits to the track but 1 station. So you went up a lift, did 1 circuit, came back round, and then met the next train departing from the station, and you went up a 2nd lift and you raced it. Well, that's fine, but as you all know, you cannot absolutely be certain that you dispatch a roller coaster train dead on time. You will have, for example, disabled guests that might be loading in from wheelchairs. You'll have elderly people that might be a bit slow. And the whole premise of this ride, in order to get the capacity, was you had to dispatch the train dead on time. And it wasn't going to work. And so I pulled the plugs on the whole thing and said, no, we won't build it. So we had to very, very quickly come up with some kind of proposal for a new ride. Well, the ride that was obviously great slightly underused here was the Rapids ride. The Rapids ride was hidden behind a fence. If you didn't go on it, you didn't get to see it. And half the fun of a Rapids ride is standing and watching it. So I said, let's turn the Rapids ride inside out. Let's allow the guests into the centre of the ride, get a flow route going through it, and that's when we put the runaway train in, which as you now know, weaves around the Rapids ride, and we created Katanga Canyon. The Thunder Looper opened at the same time. The Thunder Looper had a temporary planning consent, and we knew that it was only going to be here for a short time. So after the haunted house opened, we then turned our attention to what do we do on the Thunder Looper site, and that's how Nemesis was born. And I won't bore you with Nemesis and the making of Nemesis, because probably you've already seen that presentation that I do on the making of Nemesis and how that came about. But that basically is the very early years of Auckland Towers, how we acquired it. I, in theory, retired at 2000 because I was a non-executive director of Tussauds, and there was a sale of the company to venture capitalists, and so the entire board resigned. I agreed to stay on for a couple of years because we were in the middle of building Air, so I didn't actually leave till 2002. But then when Merlin and Nick Varney took over in 2006, is it 2006, Mark? Yeah, 2006. Nick Varney, who of course, as you probably know, was the marketing manager here when we did Nemesis. Nick Varney asked me if I would come out of retirement, and I said no, I'm very happy being retired anyway. He said, would I please come back as a consultant, and it's been a great privilege and honour to work with Mark and the team here, and with Candy and all the boys and girls at the studios in London. So that's in a nutshell how it's sort of come about.
So, does anybody have any questions? Raise your hands. Heading straight up.
Hi. You say you've been in the industry for 30 years, and obviously when you started it was all kind of new to go upside down and stuff on Nemesis and things. But nowadays you see all comments on the videos and stuff of I want more loops, faster, and things like that. Does that make you work harder to make immersive rides like 13 and Subterra, or does it make you just give up and put lots of loops in and stuff and just say yeah, whatever?
That's an interesting question. I mean, the one thing that we didn't fall into the trap of during the 90s was joining the Iron Ride race. As you know, when Nemesis opened, it opened against the big one at Blackpool, and Blackpool were promoting the big one as being the tallest, fastest roller coaster in the world. You know, Nemesis was not tall, it wasn't fast, it wasn't the biggest, you know. We just wanted to build the best. Now, there's nothing wrong with the world's first of something, and certainly after we built Nemesis, we were looking for something different, and Oblivion was the result. Now, B&M are a very, very closed company. They don't market themselves in the way that, or they don't promote themselves in the way that the other manufacturers do. They don't talk to anybody about what their plans are. But we had such a good relationship with them, with Nemesis, and they still consider that Nemesis is one of their finest inverted coasters, even though they've built dozens of them since that are 2, 3, 4 times as big and as high. But we have a very good relationship with B&M, and I do in particular with Walter Bolliger. And so I think it's true to say that we're the only people that do talk to them about new products and about new ideas. So after Oblivion, when it came to Air, We talked about a flying coaster, and it's interesting that it was Wayne that must have been the person that was hiding in the bushes when the trains arrived, because I've been searching for that person ever since it's come out. It was very, very important that the whole industry wanted to know how we were going to get you into the flying position. Vekoma had tried it, not particularly satisfactorily, by loading you on your back and turning you over. And we worked with B&M for a long time on the principle of getting you into a seated position similar to Nemesis and then tipping the car. And we kept it very, very quiet, as much as for B&M's sake, because we knew it was going to be a very successful product for them. And so we kept it very quiet as to how we were going to do it. And then subsequently we've developed the wing coaster product with them, which has gone into Gardaland and this year has opened up at Thorpe. So there's nothing wrong with World's Firsts, as long as it isn't a gimmick for the sake of a gimmick. And I think the ride itself has got to deliver a very, very special sensation. So, you know, the world's first floorless coaster, people began to realise floorless coasters really are not that exciting, they're not that special. So whenever we do a real sort of world's first or record breaker, we want to make sure it's not for the sake of getting it in the record books. And of course the flimsiest record you could have is the world's highest, because next year someone will build one higher than yours, and there's no kudos in having the world's second highest anything. So we just don't go down that route. As far as inversions, you know, inversions are great fun, but not inversions for the sake of inversions if they don't improve the ride. So you know, that's my personal view, and I think that's true of everyone here at Alton Towers.
Hey John, so you said that one of the key things at Chessington was you were taking fairly basic ride systems and theming them really well, and obviously that was really successful. So why don't we see that sort of thing more often in this industry nowadays?
I think it's probably lack of realisation that escapism is still an important part of our industry. That there really is no point in us providing the same sorts of rides that go to your village green or at a standard seaside amusement park, and that the more we can take you into another world, although it's only for a short period of time and it might be a very superficial thing, but it does add to the fun. And by decorating the rides, by theming them up, by adding effects and so on, it does make for a much bigger, fuller experience, I think. And it's probably just lack of imagination on the part of others, and maybe lack of budgets as well. The actual embellishment of our rides can account for 50% of the cost of a ride or attraction, but we just think that it's very important. It sets us apart from the competition. It's dead easy to go to a manufacturer, whether it be Vekoma or whoever, and say, this is the site, would you please design us a roller coaster? And the only thing that the creative department have to do at the park is think of a funny name for it. And we just don't go down that route. You know, we put a lot of time and a lot of effort into the way we present our rides, and I really do think it makes them special. Otherwise I don't think we'd all be here today.
Hi John. In previous projects there have been Easter eggs, if you will, in different design aspects of the ride. So for example on Oblivion you've got the SW4 on the side of the column. Do you enjoy teasing the enthusiast community with these Easter eggs, and do you think we'll see any more of them in the future?
Well, to be honest, I've never really focused on them. It's pure coincidence that someone in the design department was looking for some graphic to put on something, and that's what they put on. I don't think we set out to put these teasers in at all. You all know how the secret weapon SW thing came about, I'm sure, with the Arrow Pipeline coaster that never happened here. You know, the first layout, you know, and I've got the drawing to prove it. I marked SW1, The amended layout was SW2, and then the first Nemesis plans were SW3, and so it's gone on from there. And it's a sort of code word that we've always used internally, because of course the actual name of the ride doesn't materialise until quite a long way down the project programme. So you've got to have a code name for a project, and that's how it sticks. But I don't think we set out to titillate or tease people with these things. I mean, although we are actually calling next year's project for the time being SW7, it's just convenience, really. So the Easter eggs you talk about, I don't think we set out to do this at all. No.
Hello, John. I've got a question which is quite dear to your heart, which is the subject of dark rides. The UK seems to exist in a bubble outside the rest of the industry, where we don't focus on these dark ride experiences in the country. We've got parks over in Europe and over in America opening stuff such as Transformers, the new Harry Potter ride, revitalising Spider-Man, and things such as Efteling opening dark rides that are absolutely stunning. In this country, especially within the Merlin parks, we don't seem to see any focus on these. Do you think at any point in the future Merlin may go down this route? Will we ever see anything like Spider-Man in this country?
Well, I think that's an excellent question. Right, let's start off with the basics. The dark ride that is dearest to my heart, I suppose, is the original Bubbleworks at Chessington, which I did on a shoestring. I mean, we had to open a dark ride, we had to do it very quickly, and the Bubbleworks was done on a shoestring, and I think it worked extremely well. But as soon as you start to produce a more sophisticated type of ride, that is where budgets absolutely race away. So money is one of the stumbling blocks, which is the reason why all the rides that you mentioned are in sort of money no object parks. Efteling doesn't have to run at a profit, it's a charity, and they've got money coming out of their ears. The other parks were obviously Disney and Universal. They're in a different league to us. They can afford to invest 35, 40, 50 million dollars on a ride without blinking. So money is one thing. But the other thing, which is just as important, is the question of intellectual properties. Hole-in-the-wall attractions, as we call them, are very, very difficult without an intellectual property. Hex was a very good example. If you just have an attraction which cannot be seen from outside, people don't know what it is, it doesn't have a well-known brand associated with it that immediately fires people's imaginations, then it's very, very difficult to make that ride work commercially. But as soon as you've got an intellectual property such as Harry Potter, such as Transformers, such as Spider-Man, that's when you can make it work. And these are things that we're looking into. Merlin now has a division that is looking into intellectual properties. One of the problems, of course, that we and other parks around the world that don't own the intellectual properties in the first place is that by the time one is aware that an intellectual property is a big success, the chances are it's reached its zenith. And by the time you have then designed a ride and exploited that intellectual property, it could be on the way down. Whereas the likes of Disney and Universal are able to conceive their new rides and attractions at the same time as they're conceiving the new films and launching them all together. But I think it's true to say that Merlin also have an iron in the fire in that way now. So you can watch this space. Does that answer the question concerning dark rides? Because it's an interesting one. There are very, very good reasons why dark rides are tricky things. And yes, it is something dear to my heart. I do believe that dark rides have got a big place in our industry. And I sincerely hope in the next few years we'll be developing more of them.
With dark rides, do you think the public might respond better if it was incorporated with a roller coaster like Raptor Attack of Light Water Valley or Scooby-Doo in Australia? do you think that would help with the public's perception of the ride if it was, they could see it was a roller coaster in a building?
Well, as soon as you put a roller coaster in the building, the effects are fairly irrelevant. I mean, if you take the rock and roller coaster, the effects in the rock and roller coaster just consist of a few bits of flat cut-out fluorescent painted, scenery, and things like the Mummy Returns. An awful lot of those effects, if you walk around the Mummy Returns, you'll see that the effects are extremely sophisticated, but there you're using a transit system as really a high-speed dark ride transit rather than just a roller coaster. One of the main problems that we would have here is you need a gigantic building to put a meaningful sized ride that is fast, in other words will take a lot of track and put it in a building, and we would never get planning permission here for a building on the scale of any of the big roller coaster dark rides that you mentioned, which are colossal. So that's a big drawback. Once you've got the big building, it's relatively easy to bung a roller coaster in and put some effects in, and providing you've got an intellectual property that then draws them in, then you've got a successful attraction, and it's not difficult to do it. I hoped many years ago when we put the Wild Mouse in at Chessington that we would be able to completely encase that in a building, because a Wild Mouse dark ride, if you've ever ridden, there aren't very many around, a couple in America, but you put a Wild Mouse like a standard Mack or Gerstlauer or one of those track layouts inside a building, and you're whizzing around through partitions and so on, light it with some black light, and you get a really fun ride. But it involves a huge building to enclose such a big roller coaster. You either do that, or you actually just enclose the track in a series of tunnels, as they did at Cedar Point, and then it's just like a gigantic worm on the park, and it looks hideous. So yeah, it's not easy, but it can be done.
Just a bit more from the website, so we can put some in from that. How has the enthusiast community had an impact on Merlin's, and before that Two Swords, developments, if at all?
Well, I can't really answer that from Merlin's standpoint, but I can from my own personal standpoint. The difference between your forum and a lot of the others is, in general, your forum is positive. There's nothing wrong with criticism, but your negative comments are made in a positive way. What really does annoy me, and we just switch off, are these websites where you've basically got a lot of cowards that hide behind the internet and just slag us off in a non-constructive way. I've got no time for that at all. The internet, there are a lot of people that haven't got the guts to stand up and face the world, and they do that behind the anonymity of the internet. Whereas your forum doesn't work that way. In general, your comments are sensible. They're fun and light-hearted, but they're sensible, and where you have got negative comments, and you're very, very welcome to voice them, it's done in a positive way. So I think that's quite important. Sometimes I marvel at the intuition that you show. As I think someone said before, generally speaking, when people start writing comments saying, I know someone that works at the park who told me that such and such and such and such is definitely going to happen. They are the people that are talking out of their backsides. You don't need to take a blind bit of notice. Whereas there was one guy, I can't remember who it was, but it was on your site, who very quietly came up with just a few sentences speculating on what 13 was going to be all about, and it was spookily accurate. It really was extraordinary. And I thought, here's someone that really has been quietly thinking, and they got it right, they really had. And then subsequently some no-limit simulations appeared on YouTube that were very, very accurate. So it's the intelligence that you show on Towers Times which we find, or I find, useful, and I don't switch off. I do read, whereas on an awful lot of the other sites you get through a few postings and you just think this is childish and switch it off.
Comes to force.
Any more questions? Oh, yeah. come over this way.
Hi. If you'd have joined Two Swords or Alton Towers a little bit later, so say the weird Julie thing had been built, how do you think that would have affected the park in the future? What had been built? The weird dueling coaster thing. That right. Yeah. Well, yeah. We'd have had to have put up with it. We'd have made the best of it and found a way of making it popular, and then moved on. I mean, there were lots of things when we acquired Alton Towers that were not right, and the Rapids ride was a good example. I don't suppose any of you can remember the Rapids ride as it was, but it was rather like the log flume is now, where until you went through an entrance next to where the log flume entrance is now, and along a chain link fence queue line, you didn't get to see the Rapids ride, and it was a terrible waste. So Katanga Canyon didn't exist. So we were able to take what was here which wasn't right and turn it around. And so I'm sure we would have done the same with the dueling coaster, but I'm very glad that we didn't, because if we had acquired that dueling coaster, we wouldn't have had the money to build the runaway train and the haunted house, for example. So it's just use of capital.
Hi there. I know it's very subjective, but to me it does seem that we've never had a ride since Nemesis that's been as intense. Do you think that there's a tendency now to try and make rides too smooth and graceful rather than be outright extreme G machines?
No, I don't think intensity comes into it. Nemesis was an interesting one because the actual layout and profile of Nemesis is not that dissimilar from the first B&M inverted coaster that went into Six Flags in Chicago, which was the one that Nick Varney and I went to ride before we put Nemesis in here. Just quickly recapping for those of you that don't know the story, we were planning the Arrow pipeline for the Nemesis site. I went and rode the prototype in the Arrow factory in Utah, and it was a dreadfully slow, boring ride. It was obviously not going to be an exciting ride, and we pulled the plugs on the project, and we had to think very, very fast. And then I heard that B&M were putting a new kind of coaster into Six Flags in Chicago, and myself. Well, first of all, we contacted B&M and they would tell us nothing at all about it. And then I contacted a colleague of mine who worked for Six Flags and said, if we scratch your back, will you scratch ours? And we agreed on we would do them a little favour if they'd tell us what this ride was, because the rumour was it was a coaster that was below the track that went through inversions. And we knew from our experience with the Vampire at Chessington that that was impossible. So he said, okay, I will give B&M the clearance to talk to you about it, and they did. And we then went and rode, Nick Varney and I rode the ride at Six Flags in Chicago, and we sat down with B&M and reprofiled it, did a complete new layout and reprofiled it, but in terms of intensity, the B&M inverters have not got more intense since we did Nemesis, and one could argue that Nemesis is as intimidating a ride as our guests really want or need. You know, we have to be aware of the fact that we are a family resort, that although roller coaster enthusiasts want the world's most terrifying ride, it's not necessarily the right thing for here. We want to produce things that are bigger and better than other parks, better being more important than bigger, of course. And intensity isn't necessarily the most important thing. It's fun and excitement and exhilaration and so on. So perhaps with Nemesis, you know, the fact that the safety envelope was deliberately designed to go very close to the rock, so that you thought you were going to graze your feet and all that sort of thing. It does make for a very, very exciting ride, but there are others that find, for example, Oblivion more intimidating than Nemesis. There are lots of people that won't ride Oblivion, but they will ride Nemesis. So, you know, we are still creating very thrilling, very intense rides, and I think you'll find next year something pretty thrilling and intense. No, we're not softening our rides for any reason. No.
Hi John. What new attraction either built this year, or if you can't think of one, the last few years, have you been most impressed by outside of Merlin Park, I guess?
Outside of Merlin Parks?
Yeah, I don't want to give you I don't want you to feel like you have to say, oh, the Swarm. Just because you work for them.
Well, actually, I only rode Swarm for the first time a couple of weeks ago, and I still haven't ridden the ride in Gardaland, even though, you know, I did the layouts and profiles for both those rides. So I don't travel around in the way that I used to. You know, sort of when I was full time with the Tussauds crew, I was going to the IARPA convention every year and going to all the parks around the world. Now it takes a lot to prize me from my home. And so yeah, I think in terms of stuff that we've been doing recently, I've got a tremendous amount of admiration for 13. 13 was a real challenge where we set ourselves almost an impossible task of producing something that would give a thrill to teenagers, but at the same time, families with young children, grandparents and grandchildren would be able to go on that ride and have a whale of a time. And that's really the ethos of Alton Towers Resort. You know, it isn't roller coaster heaven. It never was intended to be roller coaster heaven. It's for everybody. The mere fact that we've got some of the finest roller coasters in Britain, and if you talk to Ace, they'll rate Nemesis and Oblivion way up the top of world coasters as well. But 13, it was an interesting one, and those of you that were at my presentation, what was it, the year before last, on the making of 13, we had a great deal of fun with that, taking a roller coaster and doing something that had never been done before. Putting that free-fall track in, launching you backwards off the track into a dark section, all those sorts of things, and the combination of that, it was a case of thinking outside the box. You know, other people weren't thinking along those lines, and the things that were done both here at Alton Towers, technically, because you know that ride is a very, very complicated piece of kit, and those of you that were here well, did we take you backstage when the ride was running? I don't think we were able to, were we? But if you were fortunate enough ever to be in the top of the drop zone when it's running, it really does come home to you how that ride sequences. Because when you ride 13, you think you're the only train on the track, even though you know there are some other trains around. But if you stand up on that viewing gallery and you watch the way it sequences, basically a train comes in, the roller shutter comes down, the track drops, the train is fired off backwards. As soon as it has cleared the track comes back up again, the roller shutter opens and the next train comes in. As fast as that, the sequencing bit, that piece of track is going up and down continuously all day. And Terry Dunn and the team here, all the maintenance people, do an amazing job keeping that thing running. And similarly, Candy Holland and the studios, their creative abilities in the way they devised and designed the whole of that ride is amazing. And it's that makes Alton Towers Resort special. You know, it's not doing the obvious. All right, at times we might try something and it might not work. That doesn't happen very often, but it's far better to do that and occasionally maybe not get something completely right than to not try things at all and do the obvious all the time as some other parks do. you know, whenever, if something is not quite right, we get our teeth into it and we get it sorted. But you know, that's the important thing with Alton Towers, to have the guts to try things, to do things different, to make things special and not do the obvious.
Just another quick one from the internet. What involvement did you have with the Swarm at Fort Park?
Right, what tends to happen, and somebody asked earlier about how we do things. The park will decide the type of attraction it wants for a particular year. So it might be a family fun ride, it might be an intense thrill ride or whatever. And in the case of Alton Towers, one of the first things we look around for is where on earth can we put it on the park where we might get planning consent. You cannot believe how difficult this is. You track very closely our planning applications, and good luck to you, but you have no idea what the hoops that we have to jump through before we actually put that planning application in. There is a huge amount of work done by Mark and the team here. So we will get a feeling that, for example, we might be able to put a ride somewhere behind where the corkscrew is now, and we will discuss this with the planners. In parallel with this, we will be looking around for different types of technology that manufacturers have been thinking about. In the case of B&M, it's a case of talking to them very quietly behind the scenes, as far as they ask for our ideas and we ask for their ideas and so on. And then the marketing people here at Alton Towers and Candy Holland and the team at Merlin Studios in Acton then start to come up with the concept. Once the concept is starting to mature and the kind of ride is decided upon, that's when I come in and I start putting squiggly lines on bits of paper and plans, and then I use No Limits. No Limits is a very useful tool. The piece of No Limits hardware that I've got is not the standard that's available, but it's a very handy piece of kit. So we will use No Limits to start shaping it up, but that then enables everybody at the park to get a feeling of what the ride might be like, sensations and so on, and it enables our landscape architects who are going to be drawing up the plans, the planners, to produce three-dimensional drawings. So that's the sort of way it works, and the processes we go through. In the case, as I say, of B&M, we have a very good relationship with them, and we have pioneered a number of their rides for them, on the understanding that we can have exclusive for a few years before they then sell it to other customers. If any of you have ridden Swarm at Thorpe, it's a super ride. I'm very pleased with it. And interestingly enough, literally the day after Swarm opened, somebody had posted on YouTube an on-ride video of the ride, I played that on my laptop, and I had my main PC next to it with the original No Limits simulation I'd done 2 years before, and the two were identical, absolutely identical. So that proves that No Limits is a very, very handy tool for us.
Of the ride manufacturers you've worked with, which have you found the easiest and best to work alongside?
Well, I think it's true to say that B&M are the easiest. They have there's a great deal of mutual respect between us and B&M. They're a very quiet, considered organisation, and they're delightful to work with. Their products are the most expensive, without a shadow of doubt, but you get what you pay for. And for every £1 million you spend with B&M, you get £1 million worth of value. The basic secret of B&M, and I'm sure you all know this, is the pattern that they have on their track and the way they produce the spine beam. And it then takes all the guesswork out of the tube bending. No other manufacturer can do this. No other manufacturer has ever been able to make roller coaster track as good as B&M's track. But it's not just that, it's the backup service that we get from them. And we have a good relationship with the other manufacturers, you know, Intamin and Gerstlauer and the other manufacturers. They're all good people. And it's horses for courses, you know. There are some types of ride that you go to a particular manufacturer for, other types of rides you'll go to another manufacturer.
There's 2 more questions, so if you desperately want to get one in, now's your time.
There's someone down at the front that's been desperate.
Good question now.
But yeah.
In regards to creating an experience instead of just a ride, would you feel that the interactivity of Duel has sort of destroyed, to put it politely?
Well, yeah, the problem with shoot-'em-up dark rides is the rider is so involved in the activity of firing at little red dots in the dark that you could actually put anything in there and you know, it's not that relevant. So, yeah, I'm not a great lover of shoot-'em-up dark rides, but it's something that people want and people like, and it enables one to refresh you know, an old ride, yeah, the public like them.
Hi, there's a lot of talk about IPs and external brands. Merlin and Two Swords have had quite good brands, Nemesis being one of them. You've got Nemesis Subterra and Nemesis Inferno. What other sort of brands can you see Merlin building on, and how far do you think you could go with certain brands as well?
Well, because of the way, because of the amount of thought and effort that goes into designing a brand around a new attraction, and a huge amount of thought goes into it, far more than any other park, I would say, certainly in Britain.